Morning. This is Barclay Hagan, and I am the Director of Client Care for OnPoint Consulting. I just wanted to welcome everyone this morning to our webinar, Sage 300 CRE Report Designer, and we have Mike Pazinski here who will be presenting for us. Before he gets started, I just wanted to let you know Mike will be taking some time for questions at the end of the session. So you can type those questions in throughout over in the control panel under questions, and we will cover those at the end. And Mike, I will hand it over to you.
So yeah, we're gonna go through some basic not basic fundamentals, they're must have for the first 15 minutes, and then if anyone has questions and wants to submit those, we'll cover those too. And then if afterwards you get to thinking and you have other questions, please email us. So this is the first in a series of sessions we're going to do, and it's really about advisory services and how you guys can be more prepared and more enabled when you're asked to in this case to provide information on your Sage systems. And so if I can figure out how to work my computer here. So we're going to start at the beginning here with must-have things, and then we're going to have another session and another session where we build on this. So what we're going to do today is fundamentals, things you just have to know with Sage reporting when you're doing your own Sage 300 report. We'll cover how to start the report, and then mission critical steps and these fundamentals that build on one another. And today we'll also take a quick peek at the data dictionary. You know, in all the years of us doing this, you know, that's a common question, so I didn't want to not cover that. So please, you know, we did these close to lunch. People are starting to diffuse a little bit. So please don't feel like you have to take notes. You're going to have a recording. It's really more important that you kick back, relax, put your feet up, and just understand the concepts and the whys. That's really the important part. And then we'll make the session recording available to you so you can use that back in your office, you know, next week. So let's jump into Report Designer. So our goal here, and this is the way we've always done it, whether it be with TUG or with Sage Summit or Insights conferences, we present and we do education on concepts and complex things using very simple data. We don't want to muddle up things. So I did this with a AP invoice report, and the goal here is say you're asked for a report for AP invoices by vendor, which is pretty straightforward, but whoever asks for it wants it by state. And I'm making this up, it's an example of a unique request. And in this case, somebody says, hey, can you get me a report of vendor invoices, but I want to know what we paid the vendors by the state they're in. Okay, maybe it's for use tax or sales tax or something. Again, I'm making that up, but that's the concept. So our goal here is to get a report where you've got the state, and then we're sorting by vendor, and it's showing the invoices for the state, then for the vendor, all right, with subtotals, and then totals for the vendor, and then there's a total at the end of the report. All right, we are into Oregon now, and as you can imagine, there's a few more in Oregon, okay? All right, so we're gonna fire up a new report design. Let me get rid of him. And I'll go File, New. I've got Report Designer open, by the way, and I'm in sample data, and I'll go File, New Design. And let me get to my cheat sheet note so I don't leave anything off. Now, we're asked first for the tables you want to choose. This is really probably the most important secondary step in your design. The first step is to draw it out and know what those tables are, and we're going to do that in another session. But you have to know what they are when you start. The reason is, like in this case, I'm going to say I want the invoice and I want the vendor. This is a double-edged sword. So Report Designer, it knows the relationships between the tables. You don't have to do joins, and you don't have to do these crazy lookups. If we have these relationships, it just builds all that behind the scenes as you're selecting tables. Notice you can't deselect tables, right? You can't say, yeah, we're going on a date, and then, I changed my mind. It just doesn't work that way. When you're selecting tables, it's building these relationships in the background, so you don't have to do joins and stuff. And so it's very important, again, to know what they are up front. And we'll cover that in another session. All right, so I've created a design and I want the invoice and the vendor table. All right, now the very first thing that needs to be done next is to decide what your sort order is. All right, now if we go to design sort order, and again, you'll have this recording, there's really two things going on here. One of these is, what do you want to process? All AP invoices or all AP vendors? I know in the Sage training curriculum, this is called the processing record. It just means what table is read from top to bottom in its entirety, all invoices, all vendors. Now, what does that mean? Well, if I drive through all vendors, I'm going to get every vendor on my report, regardless of whether or not they've got invoices. So do you want all vendors even if they don't have invoices? Alternatively, if I pick invoices, it's only going to include those vendors if they had the invoice, okay? So that's a question you have to ask and have an answer to. Do you want to see all vendors regardless if they have the invoices or not? Or do you only want to see vendors who have invoices? And then that drives, which table am I reading in its entirety, okay? And then we have the sort. Now, if you hit the pull down on the sort, we've got the primary sort is vendor invoice, the secondary is batch vendor invoice, and then a tertiary is print and invoice entry order. So Sage made the primary, secondary, and other sorts, knowing that customers may want to choose these more frequently, and so these things are indexed in the background so the report prints faster. All right. Now, in our case, we want to know first by state, the state the vendor's in, and then we want to know the vendor, and then we want to know the invoice. So this is close, but not quite there. So we're going to do a custom sort. So the state the vendor's in is on the vendor table. So I hit index, I went over to vendor, and I'm going to double click state. All right. And then the vendor is both on the vendor table and he's both on the invoice table. All right. So the rule is pull these things from the driving record whenever they're there. Since we told it we want to process all invoices, where you've got the field in more than one spot, grab it from the table you're processing. So think about that. It's reading that table top to bottom. Think of an Excel spreadsheet and it says, give me the vendor. Well, what's better, to grab the vendor from that table or to get that table and then go find it on another table? Well, it's obviously a lot more productive and efficient to grab it from the table you're reading. So I want the vendor and then I want the invoice, and that's my sort, state, vendor, invoice. And again, we're going to cover the data dictionary, not the data dictionary, we're going to cover the data structure and how do you know which tables you need and which fields you need. We're going to cover that in another session. I realize that's just as important. So I hit OK. All right. Always double check this, all invoices, state, vendor, invoice. Now, we just affected our ability to do 5 things on the report design. So if you get anything out of this, just remember that the sort order is affecting 5 things, all right? It's affecting your totals and your summarization. So now if I hit totals, I can total by state and I can total by vendor. All right, that's because it's in the sort, all right? I can also summarize by state or vendor. The users of this information might say, I don't need to see all the invoices, just let me see a total for the vendor. Well, in that case, you'd summarize by vendor, and he's not there under the state unless we sort it that way, okay? It also affects line spacing. We can do line spacing now between states, between vendors, and then the invoices below that, all right? That's because it's in the sort. It also affects our group page breaks. Important concept here. Do you want to unconditionally break on states? No matter what, break on the state. Or do you want to make it conditional? If you're printing invoices for the state and then it goes to another state, but then the page has to break, do a page break before you did that second state. Make it conditional based on whether you can fit all of that state and those vendors and invoices on one page. Again, this is affected by the sort. All right, so let's jump into our design then. You know, a lot of us will be clicking around. Somebody called me a clicker one time, and it's like, you know, if I add a field here, it's not going to be in the right spot. You want to start in row 4, position 1, row 4, column 1. So just make sure your cursor is in row 4, column 1 if you ever get out of sequence there. Okay. And then we're going to start building our report. Now, we'll learn in another session. I've probably got a mucked up piece of paper where I've penciled all this out. But the first thing I'm going to grab then is I want to grab the state. And he is over on the vendor table. So I'm looking at invoices. I'm going to hit index and pop over to vendor. Now remember, you'll have the recording to go through this, especially if you can't sleep tonight. So I'm on the vendor and I'm going to double click the state and he appears on my design. The cursor automatically then places in the next logical position. I don't have to do anything with cursor placement. It's just waiting for the next field. So I've got my state. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go below the state just so it's an appearance. Here's the state and then the vendors. And now I'm going to grab that vendor. I'm going to index over and hit invoice, and I'm going to grab that vendor ID. All right. He's not looking really good. I'm going to separate him a little bit more. I'm going to highlight him and hit delete. You'll notice when I hit OK, I've got to go back and hit that vendor, this column title. I'm going to bring him over to the right a little bit. And now I'm going to grab the vendor. That looks a little better. And then I'm going to grab the vendor name. So I'm going to index over to the vendor and grab name. So now I've got the state, the vendor, and the name. And then under that, just for aesthetics, I'm going to hop over, index back over to the invoice, and I'm going to grab the invoice, the description of that invoice, and the amount. So as I look at this state, then the vendors in that state and their invoices in that state. Okay. Now you can see that my column headings got a little bit off. I'm going to highlight these and select all of these guys and just drag them up. All right, so now everything's nice and horizontal for me. And I'm also going to tell it I want totals. So I'm going to go to design totals, and I'm going to say, give me report totals, give me state totals, and give me vendor totals. And a couple of nice little features here is one is drop the total if only one group prints. So if you've got a vendor and he's Acme Concrete and he's only got one invoice, don't print a total for Acme Concrete. He's only got one. Whereas if you've got Acme Concrete and he's got 2 or more invoices, print a total. That makes sense. So that's what this checkbox here does. That's a nice for aesthetics on your report. All right. And then another feature is if you only print report totals. So if you just had a list of vendors and all you wanted was those totals, you can do that too. Just tips and tricks as we're going. All right, you see it added the totals. And now I'm just going to print preview and grab the AP master. And so this is looking pretty good. I've got, well, first for invoices where there's no state, I don't have a state. So for instance, California, then I've got the vendor ID and the name, and then below that, the invoices for that vendor, for that state, and then the subtotal. And then as I page down, I'm gonna hit end twice to go to the bottom or the end. Now I've got my report total also. All right. You know, I think for me, it would make sense. I do want to get a page break by state. I think it would be more readable. So I'm going to go up to design, page breaks, and I'm going to say unconditional, give me a page break on the state. All right. And then I'm going to print preview, grab the AP master. All right, so now I've got my no state vendors, and if I hit next, now I've got California, Oregon's repeating, and so on. So, you know, we're staying away from formulas, we're staying away from prompts. We covered those in other sessions. This is the core stuff you've just got to know when you design a report. And now you've got a recording of it too to get you started. One final thing to remember on any report, and this is another must-have, is the concept of print controls. Print controls mean how often do I go out, get a piece of information, and put it on the piece of paper, all right? So for instance, on the state, I'm gonna highlight the state and then go to print controls. And here, print controls are set at state. So only go out and get the state only when the state changes, all right, once per state. And also reprint it if the group is on the continued on the next page. That's an important concept there as well. All right. Whereas on the vendor, if I go to print controls, he's going to go out to the database, get the vendor, put it on the piece of paper once per vendor. So he's not going to reprint unless the vendor changes. Okay. So it's an important thing also to go through a design when it's completed and verify those print controls. All right, you can get, that's one of the number one calls we got in the call center at Timberline was why are my numbers not right? And the print controls weren't set right, okay? To demonstrate that and just the effect of that, let's say I go to state and I say, I wanna print that once per vendor, not once per state. So if I do that, check out what happens. If I go to one with a state, now state is printing once per vendor. Oregon for vendor 100, Oregon for 101. Well, I only wanted to print once per state at the heading, okay? And that's what that print control does for me. I hope that makes it a little more user-friendly on the description there. Let me go back and fix that. And guess what? My print controls are limited to my sort, right? Okay, data dictionary. This will bleed into our next session about data structure and also how do you know which tables to grab for a report. But to print a data dictionary, you go to Report Designer and then to Tools and then to something called Available Fields. It couldn't be called Data Dictionary, could it? And then you can click your tables. They're not records, they're tables. You can click your tables and select those to print. So I'm gonna grab the vendor and the invoice. All right. We'll stay away from ODBC and all that stuff for now. Just to point out though, this is literally your data dictionary. So on the invoice table, these are the fields that are available to you for reporting, okay? And then if I slide on down, that's the end of the invoice. If I slide on down on the vendor table, here are those fields. When I first got into, I'm going to show my age here. I got in as an end user in the early 90s. And then when I started report writing and I was trained, one of the very first things I did was to print the tables that were more frequently used on reports. It really made a big difference for me just to have them to reference hard copy. There's also a resource from Event One called Quick Aim that I bought too, and that was one of the best things I ever did. We don't have any, well, we're friends, we don't have any business affiliation with those guys anymore. I'm just saying that for your benefit. That's all for this presentation. Let's hop back over then to Mr. PowerPoint. So we've jumped into how to start a report. We covered those mission critical steps, and actually in a lot of I can't think of any sessions I had done at TUG or Insights or Summit or any of those where we just focused on these fundamentals, the things you have to know. So we covered those. I'm a little bit embarrassed about that. We just never started with the beginning or what's really important. The rest of it's just adding to it, you know. You looked at the data dictionary and found out where that's at. And then next session, the data structure is on February 25th. And Barclay, I'm sure Barclay sent out our schedule for our series of these things, but that's our next session. If you haven't got that on your calendar and you're interested, please, you want to mark that down. Okay, Barclay, do we have any questions that have come in?
I do not have any at this point. And if anybody has any questions, again, feel free to type them in that chat or question box on your control panel.
Okay.
And that schedule has not gone out. The sessions are available on our website right now for registration, but we'll be sending out an email as well, along with additional dates of additional sessions. And then you'll also get an email with this session recording.
Thank you. I only went 5 minutes over. So it's important. We're trying to make this easy for everybody. Run through this stuff, do it fast. You've got then the recording, and it's kind of thought provoking for next steps, and it's about how to be better and be better resource at your company. Thank you for being here. We only get better if we have feedback, and if there's anything you're looking for or any suggestions on the series of sessions we're doing for the group, please send them to us. That's the way we know what you're looking for and how to be better. We've also got other free resources on our website. We've got procedure guides that are very, very popular, and then other recorded webinars and sessions. And then of course, Barclay's email. Well, this one gets to Barclay Client Care. So thank you for being here, and everybody have a great day and a good lunch. Barclay, I finished on time.
Okay, good job. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys. Bye-bye.